I've talked about this in some meditations that I've taught about thinking of my heart almost like this glowing light, sometimes covered in dirt, dust, and chains. And then yoga is just starting to break those chains away. And that's what really inspired me, feeling this glow like, wow, I've been working out all my life, but never have I done a workout where I left feeling bright, feeling clear, feeling so connected to the world, to myself, and just full of joy.
Hi, I'm Derek Mills. Welcome to the Glo Podcast. In this episode of the Glo Podcast, I again turn the mic over to a guest host. Dice Iida-Klein is a Glo teacher, and he interviews a fellow Glo teacher, Alex Artymiak. I think you'll find that their conversation is like listening to a couple of friends who haven't been able to get together for a long time, who are both grateful for the opportunity. You'll also find their conversation to be a window into what it's like to teach yoga and what the practice expects of teachers. Dice and Alex discuss how during every yoga class there are actually 3 classes going on. First, the class the teacher thinks they're teaching. Second, the class the student thinks they're taking. And finally, the class that is objectively happening. That sounds a bit complex perhaps, but both Alex and Dice agree that when you stand in front of a yoga class and teach, you teach what you are. Yoga, they say, is about coming to terms with yourself as much for the teacher as it is for the student. I hope you enjoy Dice Iida-Klein's conversation with Alex Artymiak. Before we start, I'd like to offer a trigger warning. In this episode, Alex briefly shares about how in 2011 he lost a close family member to suicide.
Hey friends, my name is Dice Iida-Klein.
And I'm Alex Artymiak.
And we're essentially here to interview each other. We are both Glo teachers, very fortunate and have a lot of gratitude to be able to work at such an amazing place with amazing teachers and a lot of, just really good people. So today is just all about kind of not prying, but picking into Alex's life. And I think Alex has a few questions for me as well. And we're just talking all things yoga and life, all of it. Yeah. So
sounds so good.
Yeah. So it's awesome to see you on here. I know we were kind of talking before this recording, and we were talking about the fact that first off, we live 1 block away from each other. Literally, we're 1 or 2 blocks away from each other, and we're recording at this moment in 2 different places. And 2, we happen to not only work at Glo together, being co-workers there, but also co-workers at camp here in Santa Monica. But we haven't been able to see each other in quite a bit. So it's nice to see your face this way, and for at least to hear your voice by the recording. So yeah, man, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I've looked up to you for so many years. I think I first knew about you through Glo. I was introduced maybe a decade ago. I had taken Catherine Budig's class. I had taken your class. A friend of mine brought me to the old studio in Santa Monica where, we could go and practice and meet all the teachers. And it was kind of like that trade-off of we get to practice, we get to see all these people, and then the content would go up online. And I always thought it was just remarkable to see you kind of take off. At that time, I felt like Glo was so far ahead of its time. People weren't really streaming yet.
Yeah.
And so that's such an amazing way to start your career, or not start your career, but really to kind of take off in your career. And I'm so interested to hear, how was that process and how was that growth for you?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, that's already a really good takeoff point. I mean, it's so interesting to think about too, because in 2022, the online digital age is so apparent, right? I mean, with everything. And like, I think I happened to stumble into yoga. I don't think there's any such thing as the right time. I think actually every time is the right time. It's just what happens, but it was serendipitous the way things kind of fell into place. As far as the beginning, I was doing so much teaching publicly in Los Angeles at like Equinox and smaller studios, WeHo to South Bay to the Valley to downtown, right? All that drive. But Glo was the one place that was very much like a hub and a center. And I believe it was actually Derek Mills, the CEO and the founder, co-founder, along with one of the lawyers at the time that happened to take my classes at Equinox. I think he was taking my class, I think in 2009. And I remember, him just approaching me after a class, I believe at the Santa Monica Equinox, and just saying, hey, I own this company called Yoga Glo. We've started up. I think they started around 2008 with Joe Tastula being the first teacher, and invited me into the space in 2010. So early 2010 is when I really signed on with Glo. And it was interesting to teach to a camera because I don't know, I'm very introverted. I feel like I am in normal situations, but when it comes to sharing yoga or teaching, I feel like there's a switch that turns on and did we hear that beep? Do not disturb. Okay. I feel like, it was very interesting to be able to turn a switch on and almost like the extrovert in me comes out. But then to actually see that happen because it's being recorded was a very interesting phenomenon for me. But it has been a great learning tool in a sense, being able to watch the evolution of the way I share because of Glo, for many reasons. But I think as Glo has evolved and obviously the online space has evolved, it's been so fortunate. I've been so fortunate to kind of evolve as well. And it's just a lot of gratitude goes there for me. And also being able to reach out to people across the world, it's been quite phenomenal. So I really enjoyed it. And then now let me flip this real quick for you. Cause I mean, I believe your beginnings with teaching yoga was here in LA, right? It was at Core Power, right?
Yep. So I started at Core Power. That was I started, my first class was, and I don't know if we count it, is 2003. I'm still in high school and I'm taking some class in Connecticut that's out of a gym. And for me, I think it's a common theme where I'm like, I'm going to work out and then I guess I'll stretch after. So I'll just take this yoga class. And I don't even think we had a mat. There's just a big carpeted floor and we would all just stretch out on this floor. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, some of this stuff is really challenging. And it's such a fun balance between what I'm working out on, the strength that I'm building and how I can understand, like, why am I building this strength? How does my body actually function? How does it work together? And how does it relate to the world?
Right.
Now looking back, I see it. Back then, I think I was like, I'm just stretching and it's kind of fun. Right. And then when I moved to California, that's when it really took off. And for me, coming to Core Power, it came at such an interesting time because I was going through stuff in my life. And as I started to practice, I felt like every time I got to the mat, something would happen. There'd be a shift in my mental space. There'd be a shift in my emotional space. And I could feel the bubbly energy that I had maybe growing up that gets darkened sometimes over time when we go through, the turmoils and the ups and downs of life, just starting to peel away. And I've talked about this in some meditations that I've taught about thinking of my heart almost like this glowing light, sometimes covered in dirt, dust, and chains. And then yoga is just starting to break those chains away. And that's what really inspired me, feeling this glow, like, wow, I've been working out all my life, but never have I done a workout where I left feeling bright, feeling clear, feeling, so connected to the world, to myself, and just full of joy. And so that's what took me into yoga. And I was like, okay, let's go all in and see what happens.
So 2003 is like an introduction, and it didn't necessarily stick back home in Connecticut. But then when was the move to LA?
Actually, 2000, I guess it would have been 2002 was the intro. I moved to LA in 2003. And then the actual stick is probably 2011.
2011. So. Okay. I mean, so I honestly, you started yoga earlier than me. I think for me, it was just like it ended up on my radar and then it just took off. And for you, it kind of ended up on your radar, kind of hung out on your radar, and then it just boom, exploded. So 2010 is when you dove in for TT essentially, or
I think actually 2010 is when and before Core Power, I was doing the yoga that shall not be named in the very hot room with the 26 postures.
Times two.
Times two. And actually, I remember taking that class, and this was really what drew me to Core Power. I would take that class, and then they offered up these challenges, like do 30 classes in 30 days, practice every day. Okay, practice twice a day. And so at some point, I'm doing 3 hours of yoga, maybe 2-3 times a week in this searing hot, now what I understand is like not really controlled temperature room. I thought it was all very mindful at the time. I'm like, I feel my contacts are searing to my eyeballs, but I'm guessing that's part of the whole plan, right?
That's what they want me to feel. That's supposed to bring things up.
Everything's intentional. Yeah. And so when I went through that, I remember having these massive realizations, having my mind very clear and leaving classes. And my brain sounded like a child. It was like, why? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? I started questioning everything about my habits, my patterns, my reality. The difference was in that environment, the teacher, you sit on your mat, the teacher comes in, sits on a literal throne, teaches the class, and then leaves, and you're in Shavasana, and it's like you never see them again. And so unless you do teacher training, you have zero access to have a conversation with someone that you look up to that's been kind of guiding these realizations. And when I went to Core Power, the teacher would be at the front desk checking us in. The teacher would be at the front desk checking us out when we leave, and really open to have those conversations. And that's what really drew me. I saw it as a place where community was really fostered. Much like this is kind of reminiscent of that. I know in the online space, like us being able to have this conversation and maybe talk shop and talk philosophy and talk modality and what really drew you into it, or what was your journey like? So,
no, that's awesome, dude. Because I mean, I remember my first experience with you, through our mutual friends, was at Core Power. It was over at not the Westwood one, but the one on Wilshire, East Santa Monica, or I guess it's West LA at that point.
Right.
I just remember taking the class and just, no judgment passed on anybody else, but sometimes, and I can be guilty of this too, but like a well-rounded practice in 75 minutes or 60 minutes, it's quite challenging to do. But I do remember walking out of your class and going, wow, he touched upon everything he possibly could and did it really well. And it wasn't fast. I didn't feel rushed. Oh, it hit home in all places. And not just the physicality of it, not just the physical side of things, but I remember you're a person that I could close my eyes, and as you talk, I know that you're smiling both on the exterior and on the interior while you teach and share with us. And that was something that I very much took away from not only just the way a sequence went, but I remember this. Glo listeners, you got to listen up. You probably experienced this, but like you could definitely sense that Alex has a very, very, I always just knew you are pure yoga, man. You are built and made for this practice. And also you are definitely a conduit, which people, I think, can really absorb it really well. And I think, not to blow smoke, but that was definitely something I picked up the first time I took your class. So it was always a pleasure. Yeah. Yeah.
And the incredible thing about that, they say there's always 3 classes happening. There's the class the teacher thinks they're teaching, there's the class the student thinks they're taking, and then there's the class that is just objectively happening. Right. And I'm sure seeing you in class, having already looked up to you, having never had a real conversation with you, I was smiling, and I was probably focusing on my students and going oh, that's Dice is right there. Oh man! Oh my God! Let me just try not to mess this up.
Oh no! That's not where I was. I was immersed and in the zone with you. So no, I've always appreciated that about you. And I would sporadically take your classes here in LA, but it was awesome when you joined the Glo team, and I heard that you were on board. So I know that only takes this company, but more than this community further. I think that's one thing about Glo is we have such diverse faculty, and it's everybody fills their role, and it's not like a role that was needed. It's just a role that only enhances what's already quite beautiful here. So I think
you don't know how many colors there are in the crayon box until you start looking around.
Yeah, well, then also you start realizing, well, if I take this crayon on this crayon, I mix them together. Whoa! Now it's even more bright and beautiful. So, man, it's been quite awesome. To keep that going, just with the idea, I had this question of, because I feel like you always have a smile on your face. Is this because you feel you have an altruistic view on life? Because I feel like when I think of altruism, and there's certain yoga teachers that are more like not that you're not a realist, but some people are a little more sarcastic or a little bit more harsh in like their energy. I honestly find you to always be, yeah, there's this want to like help people and deliver information, and it has no hidden motive behind it. That's kind of what I get from you. And so I'm wondering, like, for you, have you always been like the happy kid? Were you that happy kid in class, or we all have darker sides, but I feel like you have a pretty happy, and yeah, altruistic view on life. And I think it's quite nice.
I really appreciate that. I wish I could say, I've always said, and I think it's similar to, and let me bounce this back off to something you said, where you were like, you felt like you're an introvert. But then when you go to teach yoga, something clicks. Yeah. Right? And there's this part of you end up showing up in such an incredible way. And I mean this as you yourself, but also teachers in general. You end up showing up as almost this hyper present version of yourself. And every thought that might identify you as an introvert fades away, because all of a sudden you're there for your students, and you're there for also yourself. You're there to experience it. And I'm really impressed that you picked up on this idea of like being a conduit, because I really do wholeheartedly believe that, you know, we don't teach what we think we're teaching or what we say. We teach what we are. And I think one of the biggest challenges, but also the biggest, gifts as a teacher, is that we come in the teacher role. And I think the biggest difference between a teacher and a student is a student can come in with whatever is going on in their life. They can come in super distracted. They can come in super upset. They can come up super down. That's what the yoga is here to help them understand and to process and hopefully feel that sense of lightness as they leave the mat behind. And my hope for myself and for my fellow teachers who lead classes is that you do that work before you get to the class, that really is one of the big distinguishing factors, that the teacher has already practiced before they step onto the mat, and they've already cleared maybe some of the stuff that's going on. And I can't say, you know, obviously I'm definitely not 100% all the time with that, but it is something that lives in my heart's intention. And, you know, growing up, I think I had a nickname of like Sunshine or something, which is funny because by the time I got to yoga, I was probably more like Storm Cloud. And that's what I mean is yoga really is a coming back to yourself and maybe that ability to consciously choose. And, you know, the storm clouds really are this depiction of all this stuff in the environment. You know, if we're on the earth and we're looking up at the sky, we see these storm clouds and we're like, wow, it might rain. It could be dark. It could be forever. But if we give it time and if we allow ourselves to be open to it, you know, those storm clouds are always going to pass. Once the balance has been brought back, the sun's going to shine again. Absolutely. And I think that's, you know, having practices, I think for me, practices that help me remember the light that comes from within and know that whatever is going on, those thoughts that can push us into the negative space, it's just stuff. It's stuff that surrounds, you know, and not to go super philosophical, but that manamaya kosha, the sheath of mental noise, and thinking of the soul as this brilliant light like the sun that sits inside that gets darkened when these different sheaths or these different layers of ourselves are just parts that we get so fixated on, like our physical body and our maybe our thoughts and our desires and the goals that we want to set in life, and it can just kind of hide this beautiful light. And so I think the process for us is to always like get back to that light as often as possible.
Well, I believe it, like you said, I mean, there's so much Maya, there's the illusions that kind of build up or stack. And it's like trying to get through those points to see what was so clear behind it, or it's always there. And even the cloud analogy, I feel like we also have to remember that beyond those clouds, if you think about actual science, above those clouds, there is sun. It's just clouded up. So it's there, you know?
Yeah.
And to piggyback on that, because you brought up a great point about, you said not to get philosophical, but I mean, I personally, again, you know, speaking to those of you that are listening and those of you that, you know, practice with Alex on Glo, I think that's one element. I can't say it's an old way of teaching, because I think that is one of, not the only way that it should be taught, that's the wrong way to say it, but what I remember of the older generations that taught, if we think about like Richard Freeman, you think about even even Annie Carpenter, or even Mati, like they always had a physical element to the way they taught, right? They talked about the body, but they were so great at weaving in the philosophical elements of yoga, the philosophy of yoga. And I think that art, it is an art, but it also is, I think, such a foundation. It's slowly getting muddled a little bit and almost in a way being lost. And I'm, again, guilty of it because I don't have as much philosophy in the way that I share at present time. I feel like you have an old soul about you in the way that you share at times. And that was one thing I always recognized about you from the get-go is you drop little philosophical nuggets. You do have, and you have a great wealth of knowledge when it comes to yoga philosophy, the sutras, everything along those lines. Can you tell me or tell us more about that? Because I think it's something that fascinates you as much as the physical side of things. You could tell, like the way you share.
I think, and for those of you that haven't listened, before we recorded this podcast, I had an opportunity to listen to the podcast with Jason and Dice, and I definitely recommend it. It's an amazing listen to hear, Dice's experience coming up. But I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I heard, which is when you got to yoga. I believe you took. Did you take Mati's class? Was that your first class?
No. First class was Sarah Ivanhoe, actually.
Sarah Ivanhoe. Oh, yeah, one of our Glo.
One of our Glo coworkers. Yeah, yep. Leads. There we go. Sorry, Sarah.
And you had said something very fascinating. Like you got into the class and you saw people inverting and you saw people doing all these things, and you couldn't do it. And there was a part of you that was like, "Wow, I want to know. I want to know, how do you do that?" And so you showed up the next day and you just kept coming back and you kept coming back. Yeah. And I feel like it's so fascinating because it's almost like that little seed that was planted on the first day for you is, if we all look at it, your inversion practice, your arm balance practice is second to none. It's an incredible thing. You could be on the Cirque du Soleil. Everybody says that about teachers, but I'm like, I look at you and I'm like, you could be on the Cirque du Soleil. And I see it, and I know you are so, you're very humble about your practice. And what I also want to say to that is, I see the curiosity that it's not just here's me going into a one arm this, a two arm that, transitioning from this to this. Those things, when I look at you practice, when I catch you practicing while I'm doing my own practice, let's
no wachasana. No wachasana.
I go, he's not doing that because he can do that. He's doing that as an expression of curiosity. And I can see the mindfulness in which you link things together. Things sometimes I've never seen linked together like that. And it same goes for your flows. You and I have, sorry, this is a little bit of a side note. You and I think, have an affinity for Artymiak.
Yeah.
You love that pose. I love that pose. And when I think of you, I think you are like this exquisite cuisine chef who serves me Artymiak like 100 different ways. And every time I think that you can't do it another way. Like I've had the souffle of Artymiak. I've had it all. We're in some pose, and then all of a sudden you're like, and now you just bring your knee over here, and look, you're in Artymiak. And I'm like, oh, every time. How did I get here? And it makes total sense. And again, it's not like, I know that you're not thinking there's a million ways to get into Artymiak. There's just this curiosity and an affinity. And because of that curiosity and because of your practice and your discipline, you just end up kind of getting back into that place and all these incredible ways. And it's such a pleasure to see that inquisition happening when you teach. And so to mirror that, I think what happened for you with those inversions happened for me. Like I said, I appreciate you thinking that I have a really altruistic and upbeat personality. And I like to think that for the most part I do. But I also did come from a darker time. 2011 was a really tough time in my life. I had lost a really close family member to suicide. I had moments of like, what am I doing in Los Angeles? Did I make a giant mistake? Should I be living in Connecticut? Should I have, stayed with my high school sweetheart? Should I have taken a much more narrow path? So many doubts, so many questions. And yoga was a place of solace for me where I felt that light come up. And so in a way, your curiosity that led you to really understand arm balances was the same for me. I felt this kind of bright light click back on that I hadn't felt in a while. And when I felt that, I was like, wait, no drugs, just breath, my yoga mat, and physical shapes of the body. I need to understand. I want to know. And in doing that, I learned about the philosophy. I dove deep into the sutras, and I studied the Bhagavad Gita, and I went to kirtans, and I learned from different teachers, all to understand and to, in a way, to distill how could I recreate these experiences? Because I would do yoga and I would just feel light. And at some point you get curious and you're like, why do I feel light? Like what are the actual elements that got me to this place? And if you can understand those elements, then you can recombine them and you can prepare, an experience as a teacher to hopefully guide your students in that same way. So yeah, I think that was
it's so beautiful. Absolutely beautifully said. I think to touch upon certain things, like first off, thank you for that kind reflection back in my direction. Artymiak and Drasana brothers. I'll remember that. We'll get tattoos. But I think it's a beautiful, I think, self-reflection that you've made about how, how can I take these discoveries that I'm having personally through my practice, through maybe another teacher who's sharing these things, but essentially getting me to feel these things, or I'm feeling these things. And then how do I package that, reconfigure the equation, and try to make it accessible for other people? I think that is truly the essence of what we do as teachers, sharers of this beautiful thing. And I think that mindset, to me, I think that is an old paradigm or traditional thing that I hope it gets held on to with generations of teachers like us, and now those that are coming even behind us at this point. I think that kind of way of thinking is very not egoless, but I think that is what promotes the beauty of what yoga is, and I think that's beautifully put with your words, to say it that way. I have a segue that I wanted to go into with questions that I wanted to ask you about the modernization of what we call yoga, especially here in the West. So I think go ahead and say what you're going to say, and then I would love to I keep trying to piggyback because you keep guiding us perfectly where I want.
Actually, and this is, this question I have for you is kind of in the same realm, and I think it will lead to that modernization and see where we go from there. But I have to say, I think when I take your classes, I definitely understand you are an incredibly smart anatomical teacher, and I see the modern concepts, like functional range conditioning. I can see where you're going, and just to go back to that podcast with Jason, he noted something very spectacular. He was very observant. He said at some point in your Glo career, you stopped saying hello yogis. You started saying hello yoga friends, or hello yogis and fellow movers. And so you actually nodded to the fact that this is a movement-based practice, and why should we, if I say yoga, then gosh, it's like the three classes. The student's going to have an idea of what yoga is. Yep. There's an objective idea of what yoga is, and then the teacher has an idea of what their yoga is. And by saying movers, you almost take away the expectation off of it's going to be dogmatic. Here comes a bunch of Sanskrit. Here comes some pranayama. Here comes this. But oddly enough, having said that, I see in you a great deal of philosophical knowledge. And so I have this question, and I hope it's not too deep or too much or too.
There's no
strange.
Too deep.
Okay.
No too deep.
I was like, I don't know. I've always wanted to ask this.
And I appreciate that you see some sort of philosophy in me, because sometimes I wonder where the philosophy is, but I appreciate the thought. So let's go.
Well, so my question for you is, are there things that interest you as a student of yoga that you feel uncomfortable with as a teacher? Like we have these interests, right? And then it's like, how high do I fly which flag? Because as a teacher, I want to embody this, and this is what I want to present. But as a student, here's what I'm really interested in. Here's what I'm stoked on.
Yeah, I mean, so wonderful question. I think so. Like the flags that I've learned to fly high, the anatomy, the movement, the functional movement, and as of late, more and more pranayama, which I think back in the day was more the interest. It still is the interest as a student, but it was like, no, I can't teach Viloma 1. No, I can't teach Samavritti. I can't teach Nadishun, all the things. But as I practiced more, that curiosity fueled then, okay, I feel like I can start to share this. I think personally, my knowledge of yoga philosophy is at the 200-hour level, honestly. And, being brutally honest with everyone, it's like, even on the 300-hour level, there's a lot that's introduced, but I realize there's so much more beyond numbers, obviously, within yoga philosophy. And I think if the inquiry and the curiosity isn't there, so to speak, then I don't have the place to share it yet, right? But now more than ever in my life, with everything that's been going on within the world and in my personal life, there's definitely this starting to like go back into different yoga books that I put down since like teacher training some 15 years ago. And like, even like the Gita, if I pull that back out, it's interesting because back, I remember in 2008, when I took my teacher training, I remember asking, his name is Anthony Beninati. I don't know if he's teaching anymore. He was an Anisar-based teacher out in West Hollywood at a place called City Yoga. I remember saying to him, he asked about the Gita, how's it going? I'm like, I can't do it. It's so boring. It makes no sense. And he's like, that's fine. That totally makes sense for a lot of people. And also for a lot of people, they read through it and they love it. It's like, you'll come back to that book and it'll mean something to you at different points in your life. And definitely as of late, rereading the Gita just a few months ago, it holds true to like, just personally, the battle's more inside and how to come out of that and how I come out of that, how I choose to come out of that. So the philosophy side of things, I think, has become more and more pertinent again. The curiosity is there as a student and it continues to build, but it's still the thing that I'm more curious as a student and do not feel worthy enough to share as the teacher. That is definitely one element. And I think I'm more drawn towards, I like being a beginner at anything, but I think when it comes to somehow the movement of the body, I like being a beginner at it and then breaking that down like I'm breaking apart a computer and its pieces. And then I quickly will want to share it because I think I'm just more drawn to that somehow that's where I've always been pulled into. The philosophy for me, I think, is so much more, honestly, it's way more deep. It's not as superficial as the anatomy of things, really. And I think those deeper layers for me are almost selfishly, not only do I feel not able to share them, but also selfishly, I want to keep them for myself sometimes, I think, when I think about it. There's maybe it's because it's deeper portions of myself that I maybe don't want to share as much. Wow, we're getting deep. But anyway, it almost feels like therapy. But yeah, just to go back to answer your question, I think the philosophical side of yoga, especially, something I'm curious in, but maybe not so keen to share quite yet. But I believe that there's so many other philosophies in life that obviously aren't just yoga based that you can implement into yoga, right? I mean, there's so many different schools and modalities within ways of thinking that I think we do implement and that I feel comfortable with talking about. But being a student first, teacher second is something that I think rings true all the time. I think it does for you as well. And I think you said it best, is that curiosity is like that's the fuel. Yeah. And I think, I think that goes for, as a practitioner in any realm, it's the curiosity that's always going to progress you further. Not that maybe that's the end goal or the idea, but even especially as a teacher, for those of you that may be listening that are teachers, it's like, stay curious, I don't know how we got this way, but
well, the interesting thing though, is that, one of the one of the pillars of yogic philosophy is svadhyaya, which is self-study. And though you might not call yourself like a philosophical devotee, right, or a bhakti or whatever it might be,
right? Yeah.
There's something so profound. Like the idea of curiosity reminds me of this one saying that in the search for God, there are three types of people. There's the person who prays, and we don't have to say God, but if you've ever prayed, if you've ever really wanted something wholeheartedly, there's three types of people generally. There's the person who is in trouble, and they're like, oh God,
please
save my skin. Like I tried everything I could and I got nothing left. So I heard that every once in a while you'll pull us out of some stuff. So here we go, So that's one person. Then there's a second person who isn't in trouble, but that desires some sort of piety. They want fame, they want riches, they want advancement and growth in their career. So like, oh God, please send me the job application. Oh God, help me on this. Let me get to that place. And then the third person is the person who takes a step back and says, wait a minute. You're telling me when I pray, this benevolent force pulls me out of trouble. And when I pray, this benevolent force bestows upon me these great gifts and personal boons. I kind of want to know what's going on there. And so that's the curiosity that you're talking about, and it's said that for those who just want to get out of trouble, the moment you're out of trouble, God's gone. Or prayer's gone. You just don't need it. You're like, hey, thanks, Dad. I got it. Toodles until I need my allowance again. And then the same with somebody who wants something is they get what they want and they celebrate it. They celebrate themselves during it. And then at some point that all fades and they're left back in that same space of like feeling like something's missing. And then the person that stays curious, they're never satisfied until they arrive at some sort of understanding. And, that not saying that God's necessarily something out there, but something within themselves. Like maybe prayer is a form of meditation of quieting your own mind and reforming and recombining and restructuring your own thoughts so that your energy is clear and clean enough. So we're just taking an outside perspective that's really changing what's happening inside. And I think your curiosity that you find on the mat and the way that you do that, is just so in line with this idea of svadhyaya. Like you have this brilliant curiosity. Like I said, every time I take your class, I'm like, how do you think of that? And I just know, I'm like, you're just exploring.
Absolutely. Exploration is key. I think we both have said that in so many different ways. And, I think with our students too, that's kind of what we drive home is like, we're merely, again, the conduit or the guide, but like, the way you're going to step your right foot forward is really up to you. I can't really tell you how to get beyond that point. It's just like, that is the way. And if you choose to, you can go down that way,
Right.
And yeah, I don't know. I think, and obviously it goes through so many levels as far as teaching and sharing this thing. It keeps evolving so heavily. And the way I look at teaching though seems to continuously revolve in the same path. And I don't know if this is the case for you, but like just that desire and want to be like, oh my God, this is so amazing. It makes me feel amazing. Okay. How do I repackage this? Like you said earlier, how do I get this information to you? Cause I want you to see it. But that kind of stays the same, but maybe the method of getting people around the water or to drink the water is just, that's what keeps evolving, with my own exploration. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I think that's such a good segue to like the modernization of yoga. And I'm not sure like what exactly your question was with that, but kind of bring you back to that if you want.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, definitely. I mean, to try to bring it all back was like, what I was saying was that you as a newer generation teacher, and we were saying this before we started recording, that I was like, the younger generation, you're like, well, Dice, I'm not that much younger than you. I'm only like a year younger. I was like, no, our generation of teachers, not like you and I are separate. Because obviously there are teachers in generations above us. If we go with like I mean, I think Jason Dance is actually on the cusp, but I think he has been teaching longer than both of us. But
for sure.
I feel like he totally straddles the line, because I feel like we're in his generation, but also I feel like Jason's a senior teacher at the same time. So
100%.
there you go, Jason.
Yeah.
And then, but if you look at Annie, you look at, Richard Freeman, you look at T.S. Little, even like for me, like Noah Mazet and Darren Rhodes, those guys, I think they're a little bit ahead. They were ahead of us, but now where we are and where there are not new age, but newer teachers coming in underneath us, essentially, not to put a vertical scale on it, but you know what I mean?
Sure.
The timeline.
Yeah.
It is interesting with the advent of social media to think about the direction of people as they begin to teach yoga in the modern form, and how that, I mean, there's so many ways I could take this, but the thing that I think I'm going for is, how do you feel essentially about yoga as a whole, especially from a teaching perspective, but also even a practice perspective, as social media has really kind of boomed in the last 10 years, and as we use it too, because we both obviously use it to a certain degree for the business side and for personal things.
Sure.
But it is, for me personally, and I'll share after, I have such a dance, and it's such a weird dance at times where I feel like I'm in alignment and feeling like, oh yeah, samba, ooh yeah, feeling good. And then all of a sudden it's like, what? Breakdancing, nope, hip hop, nope, contemporary, no, it's like all over. And I feel so at war internally. Sorry, that's all me. How do you feel? I know it's a general question, but like, what's been your experience with social media as you've developed since, let's say, 2010, 2011?
I mean, that's such a fantastic question. I think it's just so relevant. I mean, I came from Core Power, and for people who have never heard of it, it's kind of like, I think at one point it was called the Starbucks of yoga. So even though you and I are in the same kind of timeline, I would still say like you're a little bit older generation than me, just because like I came at a time where you took yoga from YogaWorks, and I took yoga from Core Power, and there was a very different philosophy. And we were taught to, at the time it was called ditch the dogma, which sounds a little too harsh in the modern day, but to loosen up on the purely philosophical things that are like directly quotes from maybe the Gita or the sutras, in an effort to create a bridge. And I love this about that place, the Core Power where I came from, which is, I taught vinyasa, I taught HPF. At some points, I even taught sculpt. And I mean, we're lower lift pulse. It's pretty much a HIIT class. But I can tell you, there are people that would never, ever even know what yoga is if it wasn't for those sculpt classes. They would never have taken a vinyasa class or a restorative class or gotten into meditation or breath work if it wasn't for that bridge being built. And the same is true for social media. There are people that are just scrolling through their feed, and all of a sudden they maybe they're looking at people doing calisthenics, and then maybe they come across your page and like, whoa, look at this guy. What's he doing? Oh, this is yoga? That's yoga? I thought yoga was sitting and stretching and yawning and stuff. And so all of a sudden, there's so many branches that are reaching out. There's so many flowers for people to smell. Having said that, it is so far out that one could say, hey, at some point we have to recognize the fact that it's getting diluted. That, yoga is not necessary. It's not the things we wear. It's not the poses that we do. That at some point, it is my hope that myself and others will return to the source, or at least have the curiosity to ask what that is. Because I don't want to proclaim that like I know what the source of yoga is. I'm teaching from the one true place. But there is.
What do you mean? Yeah, you are.
Oh wow. I think that in the curiosity of things, there will always be a question for those that are sensitive enough to hear it. If you're distracted by the social media game and that stuff, you might not hear it, but there will be moments in Shavasana where you'll drop to places and you'll say, where am I and what is that? And why is it that I can have a really rough week or have a really bad day, and then 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour-long yoga class goes by, and all of a sudden something's changed. And it is my hope that that curiosity will kind of linger in people's hearts. And I think no matter what happens, it's like saying, there's a source code to every electronic that we have. And for anybody that wants to tinker into their computer, into their laptop, or into their body, you're going to eventually figure out what that source code is. And so how can we as teachers foster that curiosity? And first of all, it's part of our own practice to understand it for ourselves. But then, like you said, okay, I think I got it. Am I ready to communicate that? I'm not 100% sure that I've got a strong enough grasp to communicate that, and it's always going to come out funny, but you never know. You never know that the things you say, how they're going to land. For some person, it just might be the right day. Like, I can't tell you. And this is where it kind of sounds a little bit strange, but maybe you can share moments where this happened to you. There'll be classes where I have a plan, but I also, I think it's good to have a plan, but also be open to the moment and just start to go with the flow. And in doing that, other times I'll say something and I'll literally say this incredibly poetic sentence. And I, Alex, am saying it, but something in the back of my mind is actually hearing me say it, going, where did that come from? And like, wow, that's gorgeous. And like, you don't have the faculty to have conjured that one on your own. Like it is, you're in a state of consciousness and all of a sudden the words form themselves. And then I've had students come up to me after like, what was that thing you said? And I'll try to piece it together. And it's so like terrible.
Well, I think those are the moments of like transmission. Like again, God, universe, whatever, you don't have to believe in these things, but I do think it's again, you being a conduit and something just
let it happen. Yeah.
It just came through you. Sorry to cut you off, but I just said,
no,
I think
that's, I think, I don't know if this fully answers your question and, corral me back in if it does, not, but in a way, I think the more people that know about yoga, the more people that are introduced to yoga, the more opportunities there are to come back to that source for those that it's part of their path. And I think as teachers and beings and, spiritual or whatever, we have to both say, I think Alan Watts said it best, like everybody's on a journey and maybe they're walking for a while out in the sun. And I want you to think of me less as a guide or a leader that you should follow. I'm just a tree. I'm just a tree out there on your journey. And would you like to rest in the shade of this moment with me? Well, that would be fine. And if you look at this tree and you're like, that tree looks weird to me, I'm going to walk on by, right? I have to accept that. That's actually part of my own practice to be like, that's just it's not where you're at and it's not where I'm at. We're just not in that same moment. And I'm still going to continue to keep my heart open and see and be there for those who are ready to receive what I'm saying. And I know that someone else is going to be a tree for that person, or that person will come around and say, at some point they'll return back on their journey and find out that the things that they walk by through what we might call as a diluted practice, all of a sudden there were deeper things in there. I just think that some way the transmissions are coming through, and if we can keep our hearts open, then there's just no stopping it. And I think that therein lies almost the trick, which is, can we keep our hearts open? Do we get in our heads about what this yoga thing is? And I know I'm also guilty of that, of like, oh, is my sequence creative enough? Do I sound enough like Dice? But it's true. I came here as a new teacher, and I looked up to you, and I look up to Jace, and I look up to Annie, and there is a part that's like, Shakespeare said it best, to thine own self be true. But at the same time, I want to do a service to the people of Glo and to the people of my yoga community. And if they're connected to you, I'm like, maybe what is it about your teaching that I can not fully absorb, but like let that kind of color my perception a little.
Yeah. I mean, I think the inspiration is there to pull upon people that have touched you or at least move you in some way. And then in that same way, you emulate those people, especially in the profession that we're in. And I think, I forgot who it was. It might actually have been Brock Cahill, who's one of my foremost teachers from the very beginning and now happens to be at camp, which I'm so stoked about, that said, really for the first 5 to 7 years, you're emulating. When you're up there, you are you, but you have many pieces of all your teachers. And then after about year 5 or 7, you're always going to have those elements of them in you, but you do start to deliver as yourself in a way. And obviously that number could be different with everybody, but I think that is true, that it's just the experience collected. And I think, I don't know, from what I always gathered very early on, I think you are you, and, we all are inspired by each other. So I'm inspired by you when I teach. And I think that is the beautiful thing to kind of piece together. Is my view with like social media is that I happened to start teaching prior to it and teach in the middle, in more of its infancy. And now I feel like I think it's still in its infancy, honestly. I still think it's still changing shape so much. But it is so interesting to watch the evolution of social media, of yoga and social media, and even myself as a person, practitioner, and teacher in social media. And I think I loved what you said, just to kind of tie into that, is that how not from like a business standpoint, but how do we get people to be interested in yoga, and what is yoga? What are those things? And I think with social media, it's given more, you said, flowers that people can kind of smell on, different kinds of flowers to kind of smell, to hopefully get back to the root of it, to get back to the source of what yoga really is. And I think that is a beautiful way to say that there's a lot of beauty that has emerged and blossomed from having something like social media, because it's its own conduit in a sense, but true to human fashion, we like to take certain things that give us a lot of wealth and a lot of beauty, and we almost try to magnify that beauty, thinking that will bring more beauty at times. And sometimes it actually gives too much, to the point where people no longer appreciate what was more the source or the foundation of it all. And that's where I think within social media, there can be a lot of distractions. And how do I not be more of a distraction for people, and that's kind of the thing that I really dance with a lot. But I think what you said was, really beautiful about how do we get people in the door? And then the hope is that once they're in the door, that inquiry of what the essence of yoga is, which I think is self-inquiry, self-study, and then bringing it all back to, me as myself is also greatly connected to the whole. I am the universe as much as you are, and we are all one in that way. But in order to understand that, sometimes I have to go back to myself and think of myself as one, and then it comes full circle. And so I think pulling people in that way and through social media has been beautiful. I just see at times within myself, again, that dance of like, am I serving people, or am I only adding to the muck, to the shit? Sorry, but that's what it does. That's where I dance. And that's why I asked you the question. I just want to see where you sit with it. 'Cause it's like some days are super happy and like confident about how it is. And then other days it's like, oh, but you are totally perpetuating all that you maybe don't exactly feel is right at times, and that is the juggle in a way, how do you keep that pure and quote unquote authentic to yourself and to yoga, but then also how do you stay open? And I think you said it's love, it's staying open, it's keeping the heart open and not closing off, because the truth is, at the heart of yoga, sometimes people can become they see where yoga has gone especially in the West and with the advent of social media, and they almost harden to protect the essence of yoga, to the point where they start to push other things away and say, that's not yoga, that's not yoga, that's not yoga, which I think if you really look at it from an outside perspective or a third person, my heart goes, but now you're you're no longer soft about it. You're no longer inclusive. Now you're becoming exclusive, which I thought the whole practice was about inclusivity in a sense. And I get so confused at times when someone becomes so dogmatic and you're almost angry at other people about it. And it's like, well, now, although you may be more quote unquote yogic, aren't you missing the point now in a certain way at a certain time? The heart, open, understand yourself, learn to love, learn to appreciate the dark, the heavy, the light, all those parts of you. Like that's the experience, I think, that yoga is. Not understanding all this knowledge and being able to spit from a book, but like really getting back to that, you said it, source. I don't know. And so that's been the dance.
Oddly enough, this is a bit of a paradox. I just started reading Forgetting the Unknown. It's a Krishnamurti book. And he talks about this exact thing where we can get so dogmatic and, all the religions in all the world from the day they started to 2022 have not solved the issue of world peace. We have to admit that, So it's not, they don't have the answer because we're not there. Right. And so in a way, he kind of goes against it, saying, it is up to each of us as individuals to understand ourselves. And we can take things from different philosophies, but at the end of the day, it's going to be you and yourself. And nobody can tell you what your journey is supposed to look like, or your journey has to be, or the correct way to the source. Because even if we're super honest, if I say the word dog, you're going to think of a different dog than I'm thinking of, because like we can't even agree on a single word. How can we agree on a sentence? Funny enough, when you say that, I think of Shiva teaching a fish how to become so I'm like, I wonder if that is where you went. I'm thinking about the entry. I'm like, do I gable grab my top thigh before I get into this? Now I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry. You were saying if someone says dog, you think about, we could be thinking about two different
breeds
of dogs.
So the whole thing, and to your point, yoga has so much fundamentals in ahimsa, which is nonviolence. And so I need to yell at you in order to make you understand that you're not a good yogi. I'm like, where was the ahimsa in that? And again, to quote Shakespeare, the bard really had some good stuff. It's like, methinks the lady doth protest too much. If you are in a point where you're so reactive to the world that you feel like you need to change it and control it, it probably points to an insecurity about your own belief system. And you're just afraid of letting it crumble. You're holding on to what you think yoga has to be and denying all these other things, when maybe the process is to not tell everyone else what yoga is, but actually inquire in it for yourself. And in doing so, you become this beacon again, this conduit of information that holds space to understand that people are going through their own stuff. And, be that tree if they're open to receive it. Like if I had an amazing cue and there's two students and one of them is really wondering how something in their body works, and then I say that cue and they're like, got it. Right? To them, that amazing cue landed. Someone else might be working on something completely different. I've been working on this cue for years. It makes total sense to me. I hit it, I say it. One person, you can see the eyes just like shine like stars. They're like, oh my gosh, this one cue has changed everything about Artymiak, right? Yeah. And the other person's just picking their toes.
Yep.
Were they ready to receive the information? Was I open? The best that I can do is open myself to share the information for those who are ready to receive it, and to not push it too far, because to something that you said, it might actually close off somebody who is on the fence. All of a sudden It feels very pushy and they don't feel welcome. And I think you do such a good job of including such a vast majority of people, getting them interested in yoga. And you have, whether you know it or not, a very deeply, I think, spiritual practice in the way that you're curious, and in the intentions that you set when you go to teach, I can feel a lot of love in how you're helping people. I don't think I've ever seen you like run out of class. You've always been so amped when somebody has a question to sit down and like address what that is. I can see like the lights kind of shine. I think that's back to certainly at full, when you were like, you see yourself as an introvert. When you're talking to somebody who's like, hey, Dice, the other day we took Brock's workshop together and somebody was like, Dice, I don't think I can get my wrists into this range. I saw you just like light up and you're like, I have the answer to that. And you're sharing it from this place of like, really, it's beautiful. And you're not thinking I'm an introvert. You're like, here's the information and I get to transmit it right now. And here it is. And hopefully it helps and maybe it lands, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, but it's worth the shot. I thank you again for that reflection. I think we are privileged, my friend, to do what we do. I mean, even to be here on this podcast, talking to one another about, all things, for us, it's highly interesting. For other people, might not be, but
I think people might be interested. I hope they are. I know, and if nothing else, they say the greatest things are the things that we're most interested in, and hopefully, if nothing else, they get the vibe of like, wow, two impassioned people having a conversation. They could be talking about,
Well, selfishly, it fills my joy cup. I've been nothing but smiles the whole time. Like they don't get to see our recording of when we get to see each other through the camera, So I think
that's true.
But again, I think you all can hear Alex is smiling. Hopefully you can hear my smile as well. Just being able to discuss this stuff and really kind of, tap into what is present for us as teachers now and kind of our story from back then and moving forward into the future.
I know we're running a little bit out of time, but I did have just one last question. You can, okay, cool. My last question is, and I think it's a really great tie-in for all of this is to you, as both a teacher and a practitioner, what makes a great class? Is there a central theme that underlies how you teach? Is there this maybe this one seed, this one idea that is kind of transcended, it exists in all of your classes? Or if that's too heady, then how do you want your students to feel by the time the class is finished?
No. I think the first question is very true. It rings true because I've been fortunate enough to work with the Camp Tampa yogis for the past 3 months. I've been mentoring 6 different teachers and meeting with them 30 minutes. Some of them are every week, some of them are every other week, and meeting with them. And it's been a great learning process for me. Maybe they don't know that, but to all of you, if you are listening, every situation, every experience is obviously a learning situation if you look at it that way. And I think for me, trying to quote unquote mentor people, they don't realize they're mentoring me into being a better listener and teacher and trying to understand people better. I think the reason I'm saying that, what makes a beautiful class, sequence, yes. Understanding of anatomy, yes. Cueing, philosophy, sure. Those things do matter. It's not like they don't, because you could teach. I think it's possible to have a pretty, not horrible sequence, but a sequence that may be unsafe or doesn't, in my eyes, isn't as adaptable for almost everybody. You can't please everybody, but I think there are ways to make it accessible for the most part for a general population. Personally, in the end, what it will come down to, though, in my eyes, speaks back to kind of what we talked about, is who the person is more or less outside of the yoga space. Doesn't have to be the same when you teach, but I do think it goes a long way when people are authentically themselves. If you are more of a sarcastic, straight, direct person, don't need to put on any act or anything when you teach and be more frou-frou or more philosophical. If that's not you, it'll come through regardless of how great your sequence is. I think there is an authenticity that does exist with teachers, and you can just tell people that are comfortable in their own skin for the most part. And when they share, it just leaves you feeling very supported and almost protected by them being who they are wholeheartedly and with confidence. I think it makes the whole class kind of just run at the end, where even if I'm beat up, I've worked out a lot or I haven't worked out a lot or whatever it may be, at the end, I still go, you know what, that was a good class. And sometimes it's not like you could put your finger on exactly what they did, but it's more the way they made you feel internally, not physically, that you walk away going, that's a good class. And I think that to me currently is what rings true for like your class, Jason's class, Annie's class, Brock's class, Calvin's class, Tiff's class. I think that's the thing is like everybody's so different, but at the end of the day, at the end of it, I go, I feel good inside. I feel good about myself there, and the thing about all those people too, depending on your sequence and whether you're anatomical or not, I've been doing this with the mentors, is having an anchor of some sort that you as a teacher pulls on and draws yourself back to in the middle of a class. Not necessarily an anchor for your students. And it could be, hey, we're going to work on adduction of the thighs today. That could be an anchor for everybody. But I think for me as a teacher, personally, the way I like to sequence or at least move through things is, hey, Dice, there is that one thing that we're trying to post ourselves up on, because that does give us a directive, and having that anchor or that buoy that kind of keeps us in the turbulent waters, it still holds us in place regardless of how high the water goes. That thing is what also I think breeds a pretty good, well-rounded class, is having a directive of any kind, whether it's emotional, philosophical, but having a direction that you're trying to take yourself, and then in turn guide, captain the ship with everybody on it to a good place. I hope that answered the question.
Wow. It answered it. And I just want to almost summarize it in two things. One is, that's incredible. I think the thing that I heard you say is, when a teacher shows up authentically as themselves, it gives all of us permission and to feel that we can be authentically ourselves. Like, you're like, wow, I feel good being me because there was a person who felt good being them. And
absolutely.
Again, we're sharing not what we're saying and not what we think we're teaching. We're sharing what we are. And you're right. If you want to be a teacher who speaks philosophy, don't just come in with a bunch of philosophical things written down that you heard was really good. Understand that. Let it live in you. Let it breathe in you, and let the Freudian slip just happen. Yeah. Because, it's going to come out. The truth will air. And so if that truth is something that you are connected to, and you've done the work to understand that, then that Freudian slip isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to embrace, and just know you're just going to keep sharing what you are, and you choose to do that. And the other thing you said was having that anchor. And I love that. I always feel that. And I think that's something, when we first talked, and I think you had asked for feedback, and I was like, I always learn a lot from you. The days that I learn the most are when you're like, hey, we are going to do the adduction of the something or other. And now in my head, I'm like, okay, I know we're going to do a bunch of stuff, but this is the thing that I'm going to take away. This is the thing that I'm really going to hear when he cues this, what directions he's coming from. And I agree with you. I've always felt like that's such a strong form for the formlessness that is yoga, right? We have this thing that guides the direction. It's the path we're heading, but then along the way, you take us into all these incredible places and show us how this one thing, to go back, it can be, well, I really wanted to not say it, but I'm going to say it. You have this one thing and you just dice it up a million different ways and serve it to us. It came. And then I caught myself and I was like, you can't say that. And I was like,
you can say it if it's very, I've heard it before.
So I know that this is probably a little bit over, and I just want to say thank you so much for having this conversation. If there's anything else you have to say or ask.
No. Thank you so much, Alex. And I appreciate, I just appreciate your candor. I appreciate your smile. I appreciate your heart, brother. And I'm fortunate enough to call you a colleague in many different places. So I'm stoked, and a neighbor as well. So, dude, no, it's been great chatting with you, all things yoga, life. And I look forward to more times in the future, man.
Me too. I can't wait. And I hope you all appreciated this and enjoyed this conversation with us.
All right. Take care, Glo friends. See ya.
See ya.
Thank you to our entire team behind the scenes at Glo. I'm so grateful for your care and commitment to serving our members around the world. Thank you to our teachers for so beautifully sharing your gifts and talents. I'm also grateful to our lovely community of Glo members. You've supported us since 2008, and because of you, we get to continue to do the work we love. It's the combined support of our team, our teachers, and our community that grants me the privilege to continue to bring you the Glo Podcast. Thank you to Lee Schneider at Red Cub Agency for production support. And the beautiful music you're hearing now is by Carrie Rodriguez and her husband, Luke Jacobs. And remember, take care of yourself because our world needs you. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. You can find the Glo Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or glo.com/podcast, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Derek Mills.